whatever you want with them. So I did that, and thinking, I was like, oh wow, I can do
You were like mind blown.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, I can do all this. But I knew I really wanted the pieces to have a certain feel, just like a really organic feel. So it was essentially, I wanted to come from within the paper. And at the same time, I was working with just pen line, black drawings, textures and things, and I started using a blade and cutting into the paper of the rhythms. And there was a time where like the paper, like when I made like these really consecutive cuts, it was like I held it up to the light, and it was like it turned to silk, and it was like this alchemy, and I was like, oh my god. And, there was a moment because I was paying attention to a lot of paper art at the time, but I felt like there was something that wasn't happening with it. You know, I saw like a void within it. I don't know why. You know, I saw it, I just did. So that led me to just working. You know, that was a huge breakthrough moment creatively, and it wasn't just a breakthrough of like, oh, paper. It was just like a creative breakthrough. It unlocked something about just my whole creative process.
There was a shift.
Yeah, there was a huge shift. And just after that, it was just like, okay, I understand how my mind thinks and how I want to be able to visualize things, you know, and what is possible, you know, through understanding maybe like the anatomy of things, you know.
And for you? You said you were a visual artist since.
Yeah. You know, I've been drawing since I was little. I know everybody usually say that, but mine is for real, you know. So, since I was 4, then I got into primary school at 5 at a very early age, and I would draw on everything that I can lay my hands on, and sometimes you get beaten for drawing on your arithmetic paper instead of, so. But I never really stopped, you know, art. But because I have art making really around me and everything, you know, at the age of 9, somebody called me an artist, really, and I had to find out what that really meant, you know. So then I started calling myself artist, you know. So, but I have an uncle who is, in a few months, will be 90. He was one of the first in the whole region to come to America to study photography at the Institute of Photography in New York here. So the entire whole lens-based art actually like flooded into my household at a very early age, whereby I began to examine things very differently and look at things, because he was a documentary / art photographer, you know. So I mean, a lot of the street, before any of the kids in the village knew what was happening, I already know what is 125th Street, what is Apollo, what is Central Park. You know, my uncle was actually around when Malcolm X was killed. He was bowling on 125th that day with his girlfriend back then. And so there is this American really like poured into my household, you know, very, very early, where I began to kind of just fantasize about things that are far from me and daydream a lot, you know. So I would zone out on drawing, and it's also as a precocious child, that was how I studied myself and everything. I never really stopped, but because I didn't have any art teacher in high school, I couldn't study it in university. So, but I decided what was the next thing to do was to storytelling, you know. So I went to school for English and literature and graduated, but immediately I got into school, I enrolled with all the art newspapers to become their cartoonist, their designer and everything. So I always find a way to make sure that I find something that will make me create art, you know, make art as well, you know. So then up until I came to the US, and then something called bills happened. Those envelopes they bring to you that you can't ignore, you know. So I have to quickly like figure out how to manage those things there, which was why I switched to IT, and I became a Unix system administrator and worked in IT for a while. In DC, I worked with National Geographic. Again, I was lucky to be thrown into a creative environment whereby instead of being in the server rooms and stuff like that, I'm talking to these really high-end photographers and they are lending me cameras from the pool room to go and shoot and all of those things around the whole DC and stuff like that. So then they have staff exhibitions where everybody first saw my works and they were like, oh, okay, this is probably why you sleep in morning meetings, because I'll paint all night. And I didn't want to be the best IT person out there. So from there, after IT, I decided one year that I was just going to stop all of that, pretending to be what I am not. And I went back to University of Maryland for my MFA in creative writing, fiction specifically. So when I graduated from there, then I just followed my art and writing path, and I never really stopped. So here we are.
Here we are. So I noticed that both of you are vastly different kinds of artists, but in some ways use a lot of similar materials and techniques, perforating on paper. You came to this through looking at the heart rates of patients while you were in the ICU? Is that how that process came about for you?
I guess this is the first time I worked with paper as a material.
Okay.
Yeah, it is the first time I worked with paper as a material.
What draws you to use paper? What is it about it that you like? And how are you able to translate the ideas that you have and the context of your work through the material?
I'm not wedded to any particular material, but I love playing with materials a lot. Like I told you, growing up in the village, you have to make do with what you have in front of you.
Yes.
So that never really left me, and I actually enjoy looking at materials, see what else can I do with them. I like questioning materials for a while, and have a very serious relationship with the materials to see what else I can get out of it. So in that sense, some of the materials are accidental, some are very much intentional, So like the rosary pieces are intentional, So, but whereas the perforated papers are accidental, because I bought the papers from UK, and they were quite heavy. They are all handmade paper with really nice and everything. And I didn't want to make it too much of a 2D. I wanted to give it a texture, and I kind of, I'm not a violent person, but I just kind of stab it a little bit and all of that while I was working on it with, because I scratch my work, like when I lay pens on them, I scratch them, I have a series like that. But while I was doing that, I kind of stabbed it a little bit. When I picked up the paper, it gave me a different feel on the back. So I decided to kind of have a full paper, like just imagine if I'm in an island, I don't have pens, I only have papers to work with. What would be will I make art or will I not make art? So from that consciousness, I began to perforate them more like in 22 by 30 first, then before I began to expand them. And, again, when you stay with certain materials for a while, they begin to reveal themselves to you, So that is how I work with that one. Then with the bronze piece I grew up where bronze is made. African, like Benin bronzes, where I'm from, are made, So again, Western institutions are very fixated with the bronze heads because they are part of colonial conquest, So then what happens after those? Does it mean that African art stopped after colonialism stopped? Of course, there were works that are made. There's a huge skip because nobody talks about modern African art. Nobody even want to talk about contemporary African art. Everybody is holding on to this whole bronze heads and all of those things. And I'm like, we can do multiple things with this. We are doing multiple stuff with bronze. The contemporary artist from Benin City is working with bronze in ways you can never imagine, which was why I decided to show the egg piece to say, okay, look, it's not only heads we can make from this bronze, we can make some other stuff with it. So, it's always the conversations that I'm having with my materials.
I'd like to talk to both of you a little bit about the work in the show, what you're working through in the art pieces, and what you're communicating through the work. I know your pieces are much larger than others I've seen in the past, much more colorful as well than some of your work that I've seen previously.
I guess, when the pandemic hit, it was just a time to pause, and just slow down my making, because I was just making a lot and consistently and not really having didn't have much time to allow for space, for new things to show up, to bloom, and to surface. And I guess I was just wanted to really to just tap into, just wanted to tap into another world, and just tap into new energies and just new visions and things that are like already within me, And I guess just wanted to, take the path of like least resistance of what that was. And I think for me, I came to making through, just not really just making what I'm inspired by, and not through researching like a particular thing. And it was just what I enjoy and what I know the most. And so I guess allowing the space and just thinking about the spirit, at the time, and just wanting to elevate my mind and growth and the work. So I was just played with a lot of different processes over the pandemic, just processes within paper.
And scale.
Yeah, and scale. Yeah, and just try to figure out some new languages, within it, just to bring different emotion within the work. And I was listening to a lot of music, like always, and I was listening to a particular album. It was this Max Roach album. And I was talking to my brother a lot about his work because, he always tells me, he's like, you gotta tap into your spirit, man. You gotta really let your imagination loose, and don't give yourself too many boundaries, within. And if you're seeing a particular type of way for so long, to harness and to channel the frequencies that you're trying to get, you have to shock your system kind of in different ways. And just the rhythms and patterns of your life in different ways, whether it's traveling, whether it's doing different movements, whether it's listening to music, whether it's just engaging people, in a different way, or just loosening up, doing something, different just within art. And so I was thinking about how, like, what world am I trying to make, within my work? Because I'm like, what are these backgrounds going to be? Like, I'm not sure, I didn't see like a background of like trees and lakes and mountains. Like, I just didn't see it. It just didn't make sense for me. So I just, my worlds are always, it's always these being inspired by the worlds that are within music, So
you talked to me about that recently.
Yeah.
How you've come to this period in the work now where you're allowing yourself to be more free. You're allowing yourself to open up and not be as rigid in the way you think about creating.
For sure. Yeah, I think I've always thought about like the most abundant type of creativity without limits and bounds is in music. Since I've been young, that's always where the highest level of creativity was for me. And so I'm always trying.
That's you, man. You measured this.
I made it come. So I feel like I'm always trying to catch. I feel like my visual art is always trying to catch up to, to what music does.
Like what music does for you.
Yeah. What the sounds do, how the sounds feel, and how they move, and the sounds that are in the front, just in the back, quiet and loud. So my mind was already, trying to find that place, And I was listening to this Max Roach album. It's called Max Roach and his chorus and orchestra. And there's a chorus, maybe like, I don't know how many vocals, but it sounds like a big chorus, and there's elements of it that can feel like gospel, or it can feel like orchestral, like European. And then there's an orchestra, and then there's, this great head jazz, and it's just a world that he made in his in this album, and it was just this glorious world, in this world of imagination and creativity and abundance, and it just did it for me, I was working on these bigger pieces, and it just was like, oh wow, it's like this is the world I'm trying to make, like this is it here, and like in this world I can do anything I want, and it just made sense just to have the freedom, and it was kind of like, it's kind of like when you hear something or see something, it's like there's a frequency this person is tapping into, and you want to continue tapping into that, and see what comes out of it, and it's like almost like this permission thing, almost, so it was a big breakthrough for me,
So these are all works that have been created over the pandemic?
Yeah, they are. But those are the two figurative works, and then the monument piece is a piece I did. I did that in like October 2020, which is a continuation of that series.
Nice.
Yeah.
And for you, Victor, what are some of the things that you're working through in these works? And can you talk to us a little bit about them? Especially this big one behind us.
I mean, like I said before, for this particular body of work that Dolly and I decided to show, she was the one that, because I have different bodies of work, and she was the one that said this is the body of work that we're going to show. So I decided to look at history, really, like dig into history and royalty, where I'm coming from, in that sense. What are the things that make us, you understand, so, and if I'm coming to show these works in a different environment like America, what kind of history am I unearthing? So we start from royalty, which is one of these is like the way a king would dress on a Sunday. But I'm also playing with something. There's a certain duality that I always play with in my work, which is the traditional and the what you would call the Western Christianity that, I grew up in both worlds. I went to Catholic schools, whereas my grandfather was very traditional as can be, So I merged both of those things because, how do you suppress certain things that you are, So it's a turmoil, and I don't want to go through that. So I'm able to make works that are able to exercise myself from those things. So I'm looking at history with these ones, but in the same token, they are not all royalties, and there are subjects, So the piece there, the black and white piece, is kind of like an homage to Raphael Eason's The Invisible Man, So the actual title of that work is called The Visible Man, So are we still invisible? You understand, So like I said before, I borrow a lot from literature. I borrow a lot from the African American literature, which I've been consuming since I was 17. So there is that cross usage of thematic preoccupation that runs through this body of work. So it's on one hand, it's about royalty, but on the other hand, do you have a king? Can a king be a king if there are no subjects?
Interesting concept. I'd like to ask the final question of the evening before we open it up to questions, if anyone has any. And that is for you, Dolly. Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to ask about the selection of the artworks and the artists, and why you chose to include Nate and Victor and Sherry Samba all in a conversation together, because their work, in my opinion, speaks to each other in interesting ways, but unexpected ways.
Well, I thought that the selection best exemplified, or rather best depicted the curatorial narrative, which was do this in memory of us. And do this in memory of us, really, as Victor talked about, harkens back to the past, but also that continuation. There was a people, right? Then there was a division and separation through the transatlantic slave trade, and then there is this continuation of artistry that is taking place both on the continent and the diaspora, and we're looking at how can we reconnect that in a more meaningful fashion. Now, I know that there are different conversations taking place in terms of soul-searching identity in Black art at the moment, and I felt that it would make sense to have three different perspectives, at least artistic perspectives, in depicting that storyline in this show. So those three different perspectives are obviously a Nigerian and Anglophone perspective through the works of Victor, which best exemplify the theme, and an African American artist that represents that diaspora. But also having a Francophone artist from the Congo in the likes of Shirley Samba, because there is also a conversation to be had and a disconnect that exists on the continent itself in terms of relationships between the Francophone, Anglophone, and Lusophone regions, right? Because we are also separated through colonial legacies by virtue of the fact that we do not speak the same languages. And even our colonial languages are different. So the Francophone world is completely in isolation and focused on France and French-speaking nations, and we are more connected to the West, and by West I mean England and the US and Canada and English-speaking nations. And the Lusophone region, Cape Verde, Angola, Mozambique are more focused on Brazil and Portugal, and there is no, even in terms of what contemporary African art means, it doesn't really exist, so to speak, on the continent. And so I thought that it would be important to have three different perspectives, unique vantage points, which each person telling their stories, so that we can then define or consider what comes next. How I'm enjoying the dialogue, the artistic dialogue through the works that is taking place, and the difference in mediums and in perspectives, but also, what comes next. And I think that for me, the solution to that is, I think the emancipation of the Black race lies in our culture, our heritage. It is something that is intrinsic to our identity, the way we choose to express ourselves, and the way we communicate culture, dance, music. I love the fact that Nate talked about how music is very much a huge part of an inspiration in his work process, and Victor is very much inspired by literature, and that's what comes. That is all a combination of our global artistic heritage, which is a joint one. It's one that we share. It's our common lineage, it's our past, it's our present, and our future. And I want us to be able to learn from one another, to engage with one another, and to come to know one another, because you cannot know your brother or your cousin without engaging in dialogue and conversation. And so this is just the beginning of a series of dialogues that I would like us to have, and I would love to replicate a more expansive version of this from a different context in the future. And I'm very much grateful to the opportunity to have this in New York as well. Lehmann Maupin, for them to have hosted the show, to give them a platform, and not for it to have just been relegated to a small space in the middle of nowhere, but it's at the center of New York, in Chelsea, and for the given a platform to express ourselves. And for me, this is it goes to the roots and the essence of what my gallery was created for in the first place. That's what Retro Africa stands for. And so I'm very proud of the show.
Beautifully said. And thank you for participating in the conversation, and thank you all for joining us. I want to open it now to questions. If anyone has any, feel free to raise your hand and shout out. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I'm curious about you guys' feelings about the political nature of works on paper. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Okay, to make sure. Somebody said you couldn't. Good. And also, your feelings about paper as a medium, because it seems like it's just not it's not just a surface. You're using it as something to express your art, and I think that's really interesting. But you spoke on it before. So.
You said the political nature?
Well, yes, because I think about when we think about art prices, the same work on paper and the same work on canvas does not fetch the same price casually. Yeah. And so I was curious about your ideas about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my understanding, I mean, it just has to do with the ability that paper can't preserve and be archival. That's just my understanding, but you know, and that canvas just ended up being the thing, you know, from centuries and centuries, you know, and then it just hasn't changed, and then people just aren't willing to shift, you know, how they look at it, and probably just because it's harder to take care of, you gotta be in a frame, blah, blah, blah. I think that's just the most basic thing of it. I mean, there's some artists who work with paper who do well, who fetch the same prices as people who work with canvas, but not a lot of them, you know. Yeah, I mean, I guess it'll just be, and then you see a lot of artists who start working with paper, and then most of them switch up to canvas, so it's definitely a thing. I mean, I'll continue working with paper, you know, with this conviction that I have, you know, in working with it, but yeah, it just kind of is what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I'm not thinking about prices. I'm thinking about what best tells my story. You know, I'm not going to be like fixated with whether paper is going to last or not, because one thing is for sure, there are works that are ephemeral in the first place. If you go and watch a Benali dance, what do you take out of that apart from the experience? You know, so sometimes you have to look at certain works like that. Not everything is made to last forever, but I can tell you that the paper works that you are seeing, if you are a regular visitor to museums, I saw some from 15th century when I went to the Met 2 days ago. You know, so definitely these works are going to outlast us. You understand, science is bringing more into play now, that whereby you can preserve some of these works, and they are all on archival papers. They are handmade, the fibers and everything. What Nate is making them from, even if you print something that is an archival print and all of that. So science has come to rescue us from that kind of fear, if you ask me. So, yeah.
Yes, you at the back?
Yeah, this question is to Victor and Nate, and thank you guys for this. This is beautiful. One thing about African art and art of the diaspora is, regardless of the artists in the museums, the collectors are custodians of the art as well, and they're channels to the world. So our walls, our galleries, we then become custodians of the work. I'm wondering, what's typically your message to collectors? So art has become the thing to do these days among young collectors. And I super appreciate art. I appreciate things around prices, around history. For me personally, I like to collect African art because I'm Nigerian, and I want to be able to connect to what I'm looking at in the morning. I wonder, what's your message to collectors as they buy, as they look into art museums? What should they be thinking about as they look at your pieces, and generally as they think about collecting art?
Well, for me, I'm not prescriptive. You know, I mean, like, everybody will come into works of art from different perspectives. There are people that come into it by looking at the dollar signs on the works. There are people that come to it because they are emotionally engaged to it, or they can relate with it, as you've said. You know, if you're from Nigeria, you can relate to certain. You don't need too many explanation to tell you what this piece of art is. You know, so there are pieces of art. People that are from my region of the country, they come, and I don't need to be there for them to connect in a visceral way. You know. But for somebody that is not from that place, they are probably attracted to it aesthetically, or even the material that I've used to create the works. You know, so people come into works from different perspectives. There are people that will collect work forever, like the Vogels collected, they never sold. You understand what I'm saying? Whereas somebody can collect overnight and flip the next day, and so it's really, every human is different, I would say. So I would leave that pretty much open for people to come into the works. Hopefully they come into it with good minds, and there are people that will like the works, there are people that won't like the works. That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Chandler, and I'm a writer, and I feel like a lot of the work I produce, or a lot of the work that gets released, relies on it having to be approved by white counterparts or white